Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The new U.S. Defense Secretary, retired General Lloyd Austin, reached his office at the Pentagon 2 days after President Joe Biden's inauguration. He immediately had two intelligence briefings, first on China and then on the Middle East. Subsequently, he started calling colleagues around the world, starting with the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, then the British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, the Japanese one, and their South Korean counterpart. All the while, Israel and the rest of the Middle East had to wait their turn. It signaled the order of priorities for this fresh administration in Washington, D.C., NATO, and East Asia first. What does that mean for the Washington-Jerusalem relationship as the region awaits the setup of the entire Biden team and its policy initiatives vis-a-vis Iran and elsewhere? To discuss the many questions that remain, joining us from Washington, D.C. is Mr. Robert Silverman, who is a lecturer at Shalem College and a former president of the American Foreign Service Association. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Also joining us from Central Israel is Ambassador Dani Ayalon, who is Israel's former ambassador to the United States and deputy foreign minister, as well as co-host of TV7's Middle East Review. Thank you for joining us as well.
My pleasure.
And with me in the studio is our TV7 analyst and host of TV7's Watchmen Talk, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, give us a broader understanding of where are the current state of affairs when it comes to the Biden administration versus the region and Israel in particular.
Well, officially, of course, the transition is over. President Trump has left the building, and President Biden is now occupying it. And there's a sense of a fresh beginning. But if you look at substance, then the transition is not yet over, because not all of the nominees have been approved yet by the Senate. They are yet to get to their offices. There are acting secretaries here and there. And more importantly, the agenda is not yet foreign. It's COVID-19, which is the president's main challenge for the first 100 days. He wants to issue 100 million vaccines for 100 million Americans in the first 100 days. It's an awesome burden. Then, of course, he has the Trump impeachment trial in the Senate to take care of, the nominations, and getting started. And while he's doing that, he has a lot on his plate globally, including the Middle East. The only move which we have seen up to now was earlier in the week, the journey by General Frank McKenzie, the commanding general of the Central Command, which now includes Israel, in addition to Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and a lot of other countries. And on his way over, General McKenzie expressed some optimism regarding the renewed negotiations with Iran. He didn't get into specifics, but he did say that during the outgoing administration's last weeks and days in office, the Iranians were restrained, did not provoke anything, did not want any escalation, and General McKenzie sees it as a good sign for a fresh beginning. He also announced that Saudi Arabia is giving the U.S. armed forces broader access to its infrastructure. So that would reassure countries in the region, Saudi Arabia itself, the Emirates, and perhaps even Israel, that if war does come with Iran, the United States will be better prepared.
When you're talking about restraint, of course, it's relative in comparison to other times because, of course, we saw still Iranian convoys entering Syria from Iraq. The various strikes by unidentified aircraft that were, of course, also attributed to Israeli Air Force, targeting Iranian targets and infrastructure in Syria. So it seems like things continue.
Because of the great concern during the first couple of weeks of the month of January, the fact that nothing happened is a cause for relief.
Indeed. Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Silverman, what should we read into the list of phone calls made by the Defense Secretary of the United States, Austin, with regard to the upcoming engagement of the United States with regard to Israel and the region in general?
Well, I think he's doing the campaign promises of President Biden and his team that they want to restore relations with America's traditional allies. So that means a real focus on NATO allies in Western Europe. And we'll see a push, I believe, to get closer to them, consult more with them about shared problems, one of which is the Middle East, another is China, a third. So I think those list of phone calls reflects that that sense of conversation.
Indeed. Ambassador Ayalon, same question to you. And beyond that, is Israel concerned about the priority lists of the United States and the indications with regard to the region?
Well, I think this is, yet to be seen. Of course, Israel is very cautiously looking ahead. First of all, because of the nominations that probably will be approved soon. But if you look at the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, and his deputy, Wendy Sherman, Jake Sullivan as the National Security Advisor, and I believe the latest appointment was of Rob Malley as emissary to Iran. These are all friendly faces for the Iranians, which may give them, I would say, the wrong idea that they can get back into the JCPOA without giving any concessions. I hope this is not the case, because what I understood from different talks, especially from around the Blinken surroundings, is that it's not going to be an automatic resumption of the JCPOA, and there are going to be some conditions that the Iranians will have to comply with. But the administration will be ill-advised if they would go only with a rapprochement with Iran without showing some muscles. And to that effect, I think more access to aerial territory and space of Saudi Arabia, and of course, I would say strengthening the relationship and bolstering the presence in Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, and the very inclusion, which was one of the last things that was actually done by the Trump administration, the very fact of the inclusion of Israel with CENTCOM, I think is also a great addition. And today, as we see eye to eye with all the Sunni Arab countries in the Gulf and even beyond, like Egypt and Jordan, I think all these are giving the administration good cards to work with against Iran if they choose to do so. And this is the big question.
That said, of course, Mr. Oren, when we're talking about the United States, we see the list, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, NATO. They're all allies of the United States on the Defense Department. Israel, however, is a unique partner rather than an ally, and it's also classified that way in light of its refusal to sign a defense pact with the United States. To what degree is this a signal of our priority list is allies first, unique partners then, we're talking about partners, and then let's talk about the rest? Or is there something that I'm misreading over here?
Well, Israel is a major non-NATO ally, much like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and Singapore too. But Israel is involved in an election campaign. And this is almost exactly a year after President Trump had the same problem, which he solved by inviting both Prime Minister Netanyahu and his then main contender, General Benny Gantz, to Washington for the unveiling of the Trump vision for peace. And he made sure that Netanyahu would not get any preferred treatment, or at least not a marked one. They were almost equals, but Netanyahu was more equal than Gantz. But nevertheless, Trump did not want to be perceived in Israel as helping Netanyahu in his election campaign. Biden is now facing a similar question, and he obviously knows the scene. His associates, as was mentioned here, know Israel very well. He also listens to former Ambassador Daniel Shapiro, who has been living in Israel ever since he left his post 4 years ago. And there is no rush on Biden's part. He doesn't have to invite Netanyahu right now or to call him up. There was a call between the national security advisors of both administrations, but this is pro forma. This is just to say hello and to say that sometime in the future they will meet.
Even though the official statement did indicate by Meir Ben Shabbat that the conversation also included the subject of Iran, of course, Israeli concerns with regard to the region, and there was an exchange of words on this matter.
Yes, but if I tell you, Jonathan, I'm concerned about Iran, and then I issue a statement, I told Jonathan of my concern about
Indeed.
Iran, it doesn't mean that they really went into the subject matter. This is going through the motions. The administration doesn't have an Iran policy yet. Of course, we all know what they said beforehand, but as of now, there is no policy yet. And obviously, we have to wait until late March or early April before we see any movement, unless the Iranians provoke something in order to push their agenda item into a higher priority.
Ambassador Ayalon, I'd like to refer the next question to you, actually. As you know personally, also the newly appointed CIA director, you've known many of the people in the Biden administration, and thus, when you look at those different people, to what degree do you think that they are quite keen or understanding of the complexities of this region at this stage, 4 years after the Obama administration has left office?
Well, I would say they certainly benefit from the experience of the last 4 years. And I think the major surprise in the last 6 months of the Trump administration with the normalization and peace treaties between Israel and 4 Arab countries. And of course, behind the scenes, the very close ties between Jerusalem and Riyadh, I would say, adds a lot to their perspective and also gives them more cards when they look into the future. There is no question that they would like to come back to the JCPOA in one way or another. This was a campaign statement of President Biden, and all the team that he put together also suggest going that way. Of course, the question is on what terms. And here, I think that they will find a united front, Israel and the Arab countries, the Gulf countries, of toughening the hand towards Iran. And here the question is, and there is a going, I would say, internal discussion in the Israeli defense apparatus. I'm sure Amir Oren could elaborate more, whether to put the crux again on the nuclear issues. That means to leave aside at this point the ballistic testing, the ballistic missiles, and the terror sponsored by Iran, and just focus all the attention on the nuclear, like, for instance, to do away with the sunset clause and so on and so forth, or to push everything together and also enlarge the scope of the JCPOA, also to include stopping the subversion by Iran of the countries in the region, and of course stopping their ballistic testing. And I think that what more they will have to take into consideration, and that is that if there is no progress on the Iran issue, that is returning to the same exact agreement as before, then I think Israel will start, I would say, rocking its boots on the ground, also suggesting or brings back the option of attack on the nuclear installations, or at least the bottlenecks, few of them, that will be coming back to the table.
Well, all options are definitely on the table from what I hear, but I'd like to ask Mr. Silverman, actually, in reference to another country in the region that is very wary about a Biden administration coming into office, and now with the various appointments being put into place a little bit, giving an indication of its expected course of action. Turkey, you've dealt with Turkey in the past in your various positions. You have worked very closely with Jim Jeffrey, also, who was an envoy to the region many years, and you're personally also fluent in Turkish, among others. But I'd like to ask you specifically, to what degree should Turkey be concerned right now with regard to the Biden administration, and is this now going to be translated beyond the attempts of rapprochement with the European Union, with, of course, Israel and other countries in the region? Is this now going to also indicate a shift of foreign policy in Ankara?
I think Turkey will be a real challenge for this administration. And it's an opportunity as well, because Erdogan is a difficult person to work with. Everyone agrees with that. He is he wins elections in Turkey, and he doesn't face a new one for another couple of years, so he will be there. And he had a relatively good time with President Trump. They got along pretty well. I think we have to look at the entire region and Turkey's role throughout the region. There are places where the U.S., Israel, others can work very closely with Turkey, and places where in Syria, we see Turkey playing a positive role in pushing back against Russian influence there. The Turkish role in Idlib province means that the attempt by Russia and Iran to complete the west, frankly, of Syria will have a problem, an obstacle in the Turkish military presence there. So in places like Syria, you see Turkey playing a positive role. In Libya, a negative role, frankly. So you take it piece by piece. You find the areas where you can work with Turkey, and it's a relationship to be managed, frankly, from that perspective. It is a NATO ally. It's the second largest troop contributor to NATO. However, at the same time, Turkey definitely under Erdogan wants to show its independence of NATO, has bought a Russian air defense system that has caused it to drop out of the F-35 program. So it's a relationship to be managed, but it's not. And I would also say, looking in the future, that Erdogan is not always Turkey. Turkey is a big country, a democracy. He can and has elections there, particularly at the local level. And I think we'll have to look beyond Erdogan at the strategic importance of Turkey going forward. But in the meantime, it's a relationship to be managed.
Indeed. Mr. Oren, I'd like to bring another country into the picture. We already established some references to Saudi Arabia, but we didn't bring Egypt into the picture. Of course, Egypt is crucial for Israel's security. It has pretty much shown its capability to keep relative quiet also in the Sinai Peninsula, where Wilayat Sina, the Sinai offshoot of the Islamic State, has been killing for years now, since 2014, of course, when Ansar Beit al-Maqdis at the time decided to pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the slain leader of Daesh. How do you see all of this actually influencing decision-making in Jerusalem with regard to Egypt, or also in Cairo versus Jerusalem?
The most important thing to be said about Israeli national security and foreign policy is that it is not proactive. It is only responsive to crises when those happen. For the last 2.5 years, Israel has been involved in a political crisis, a domestic political crisis. There has not been a stable government. This is the fourth election campaign that the various parties and politicians are fighting. And no one has the attention span needed to formulate a proactive, assertive, visionary foreign policy. That awaits the formation of a new and hopefully stable government.
Nevertheless, a stable government in Jerusalem could take a very long period of time. And as we saw during the tenure of the Trump administration, they ended up dealing with both sides, as you said, when they invited them, but also during the incumbent period, they had the opportunity of formulating various plans that brought fruit to peace in Jerusalem and other aspects as well.
Well, one can argue whether it's really peace, whether these normalization whether they really upgraded the relationship which has been taking place under a very thin veneer of denial. One of the only achievements up to now is that some 600 Israelis who flew to Dubai have come back with COVID-19. But this does not mean that Israel should not have normalized its relations with the Emirates and others, which, by the way, was an Emirati initiative which the Trump administration responded to, and which Israel has paid its part in by shelving or freezing the annexation. But let's go back to Egypt. Egypt is very important to Israel, and Israel is going to plead Egypt's case on Capitol Hill and elsewhere, because we know that the key figures in the Biden administration are human rights minded. They are going to make life very tough for President Sisi, even though they should also understand the constraints he has been operating under. One positive sign is that during the Austin confirmation hearing, the Secretary of Defense, who has been confirmed since, he was asked about the multinational force and observers in the Sinai. And even though several of his predecessors, starting with Donald Rumsfeld some 20 years ago, have tried to cut back either entirely or almost entirely the American contribution to the MFO, not because of budgetary problems, but because it's an infantry battalion, which they need somewhere else. General Austin reassured Israel and Egypt and others, the other contributing countries, that there is not going to be any cutback, even though this is a favorite target for ISIS in the Sinai.
All right, well, we only have 3 minutes at this stage till the end of the program, so I'd like to give each and every one of you just a closing sentence, if you will. Mr. Silverman, we'll start with you.
Sure. There is an opportunity here with this new administration, because this new administration has a difficult relationship with Saudi Arabia. It signaled in the campaign and then more recently that it wants a reassessment of its relations with Saudi Arabia because, as Amir, it's very human rights oriented. Now, Saudi Arabia knows that Israel has a very good relationship with the United States. I mean, Israel has, and Ambassador Ayalon has been a big part of this, cultivated a partisan approach to the U.S. that is now paying off. Indeed. So I think Saudi Arabia has ever more reason before to get close to Israel, to expand this Abraham Accords, which behind the scenes has been the main partner of. So there's an opportunity here, given the interesting relationship between the Biden administration and Saudi Arabia, and let's hope that that brings Israel and Saudi Arabia closer.
Plenty of opportunities indeed. Ambassador Ayalon?
Yes, I would say you were very right to focus also on key players in the region, which are not Iran. Of course, Iran is its own file, but looking into Turkey and Egypt is also very important. Egypt, I believe, needs Israel now more than ever. It was mentioned about the ties with the administration on the background of human rights, but also Egypt and Turkey, and Egypt and the Nile dam that Ethiopia is working on puts Egypt in a very, very vulnerable position. And Israel here can be a strategic help, either vis-a-vis Ethiopia and other countries. I would say Turkey, also one issue which is very, very important, and maybe also this is a good reason for the administration to reach out to NATO first, is that Cyprus and Greece are actually bracing for more aggressive attitude by Turkey in the eastern basin of the Mediterranean in relation to the the natural gas fields. So all this together put a very, very, I would say, explosive tapestry for the administration to deal with.
And we will continue to observe and report on the latest developments, of course. Unfortunately, there is no time for your analysis, Amir, but I'll be sure to ask later. I'd like to thank Mr. Silverman, Ambassador Ayalon, and Mr. Oren for joining us today. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.